Here are the 5 steps I've used to go from mixing 1 song a week to now mixing 3 to 4 songs a day. Step 1. Renaming and organizing. The very first thing I do when I start working on a mix is to go through all the tracks and label them. I'm using multi-tracks from my choir to demonstrate these steps, but these can be applied if you're mixing an album or an EP. Renaming may seem like a tedious and unnecessary step, but I'd encourage you to spend at least 5 minutes organizing your project, because this is one aspect of mixing that I never bothered with. And I can tell you from experience that if you want to speed up your workflow, you have to organize your project in a way that makes sense to you. I like to arrange my tracks like this. Drums at the bottom, then percussion, bass, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, any orchestration, synths, and vocals on top. This order isn't set in stone, so I'll adapt it to the project I'm working on. For this project, it's piano at the bottom, then guitars, male singers, and then female singers. I like to organize my tracks like this because they go from low to high pitch, which helps me troubleshoot problems in my project. I know that many other mixers like to have this order inverted or have a different order completely, which is also correct. But it's crucial to keep this order consistent from project to project, so you can build familiarity with your project without having to think too hard. Once that's done, I trim any noise during the intros and outros of the song. I find that by trimming the silence, I gain back around 3 dB of headroom on my master track. It's also important to add fade in and fade out curves at the start and end of the region that is trimmed. This will eliminate any clicks and pops once the song is exported. Step 2. Gain staging and routing. This is where we gain a lot of clarity in our mixes. I'll set the monitoring to pre-fader and adjust the gain of the track regions so that nothing looks too loud or quiet. I'm not listening to the project just yet, as I want to make sure that nothing is overloading the audio plugins we'll be using later on. A good rule of thumb is to ensure that the signal doesn't go above -12 dB. Again, I'm not adjusting the faders, but the gain on the track region. An easy way to do this is by selecting all the tracks and normalizing gain to -12 dB peak in functions. However, I tend to do it the long way, so I have a sense of the performance dynamics. Then I like to route my tracks into auxes and buses. In Logic Pro, multiple tracks can be selected and routed to a summing track. This will automatically create an aux send and return and route the selected tracks to it. I do this in 2 stages. Stage 1 is summing tracks together. Piano left and right go to piano sum, guitar mic and DI go to guitar sum, all male singers are routed to one bus and all female singers are routed to another. Stage 2 is summing groups together. All instruments to one track and all singers to another. This condenses my whole project into 2 sums, instruments and singers. The capital sum label on the singer's bus means I'm adjusting all the vocals in the project, while sum with just the capital S is reserved for individual track buses, such as guitar and piano. As I've routed my tracks into buses, I'll need to make sure that the bus tracks aren't overloading. If they are, I will need to turn the faders inside the bus down, but not the main bus fader itself. I'll also need to turn off pre-fader monitoring for this. I aim to always keep the sum bus fader level higher than the tracks inside it. This doesn't apply much at this stage, but will become more important in steps 3 and 4. It's because of this organizing and gain staging that I've been able to mix 3 songs a day. I've always struggled with headroom in my mixes, and whenever I had a good mix, I was never quite able to replicate it. Steps 1 and 2 ensure that my mixes are optimized for me to work on and eliminate any guesswork while problem solving. Okay, now that that's out of the way, we can get on to mixing. Step 3. Static mix, pan and volume. This is where I will listen to the mix and set volume and pan faders, making sure to turn pre-fader monitoring off. I aim to achieve a good enough static mix without worrying about the plugins for the moment. This is where I get the relative volumes of the instruments to where I'm happy with them. It's very subjective and can change over time, so most of my time is spent here getting this right. I will start by making changes to the individual tracks and then the track sum. I try not to adjust the track sum too much, as it's adjusting a lot of tracks at the same time. When listening, I pay attention to the overall performance, noticing where things feel crowded or dynamic and keep them in mind to correct later on. Usually I find that a performer is too dynamic, so I will even their performance out in the next step. As I'm listening, I'll also make pan decisions. In this case, the lead singer will be near the center and backing harmonies will be panned left and right. I will create space for each singer, usually pairing a male and a female singer when panning, so that similar frequencies are not congested. This applies to instruments as well. I pan them harder to create space for the vocals. With the instruments spaced out, the vocals in the center gain a lot of clarity. But again, this is very subjective and changes from project to project. Step 4. Plugins for performance control. At this stage, the mix is nearly ready. I will add some corrective EQ and compression on individual tracks to control the performance if needed. I'm not aiming to make any creative changes to the project, so I'll mainly use the EQ as a corrective tool and remove any subharmonic information that is muddying the mix. A gentle low cut at around 100 Hz on the vocals can give back around 4 dB of headroom to the mix and provide clarity as a result. Compression is digital to not add any harmonics to the mix. I also make sure to use the makeup function to add back the gain that is reduced by the compressor. I tend not to focus too much on the details here. I have a bad habit of getting carried away by trying to fix every little problem I hear when I listen in solo. I realized that I was making my decisions on the way my channel script looked. I felt like I was doing something wrong if I didn't have a crazy EQ curve and a compressor on every vocal track. I wasn't using my ears. This is one of the important lessons I learned at university, asking myself why. Why am I using this compressor here? Why do I have 3 EQs on one track? This can be perfectly summarized in one sentence. If you don't hear something that needs to be fixed in the mix, move on. While you can get as creative as you want in the stage, I usually don't have anything that needs any creative adjustments. My main goal in mixing is to get everything sounding consistent and cohesive, to balance loudness and dynamics. I don't want the mix to sound squashed or heavily compressed, which results in a dense and congested listening experience that I don't like. I also don't want the track to feel inconsistent and unbalanced. Ideally, I want everyone's performance to be consistent while also being as dynamic as possible. This is a tough balance to strike, especially in a live multi-track recording like this, but it's definitely possible if you follow these steps. This brings us to the final and most important step, knowing when to stop. Once I'm happy with my mix, I like to focus on something else. Usually this means going away from my laptop to rest my ears every 30 minutes. This may seem counterintuitive, but by taking short breaks, we allow our ears to remain fresh and not get tired. When I come back, I will listen to the track a couple more times and make fine tweaks on the buses if needed. I tend to spend around an hour mixing and force myself to stop and render the project to be mastered. Depending on the genre, it's important not to get hung up on every little mistake. And while mixing can eliminate a lot of problems, it's not a fix-all. It's just a process of balancing levels to make sure your project elements have space and provide context for the listener. Here are some tips to speed up your workflow. Presets. On the EQ, I have a low cut at 100 Hz saved as my default preset. This helps me save time, as 9 times out of 10, I use a high-pass filter on my tracks to get rid of unwanted subharmonics. I've also got a preset on my compressor that has a low threshold and fast attack with a medium ratio, so I can hear the compression as soon as I put it on and dial it back if needed. Using your ears, not your eyes. This obviously takes a lot of practice and experience, but I've forced myself to use my ears when I mix. One way I've done this is by turning off the analyzer on the EQ and only using it when I think I'm going crazy. Bypassing the processing chain is also a good way to hear if the changes I've made are making the source better or worse, so I do this occasionally to check my mix. Recording in 24-bit. A higher bit depth while recording will allow for more dynamic range and headroom. While Logic does this automatically, if you need to change your bit depth, go to Logic, Settings, Recording and change this to 24-bit. Thanks for watching.